and welcome to today's 18 group webinar on leveraging NLP, natural language processing, for regulatory compliance. My name is Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor at 18 Group and will be moderating today's webinar. Our expert speakers today are Ian Liu, Head of Product, Reg AI at Cube, Celia Sapala, Marie Curie Career Fit Research Fellow at University College Cork, and Melanie Williams, Senior Regulatory Change Manager at Revolut. I'll ask them to introduce themselves in just a moment, but first a few tips for you to make best use of the webinar. To the right of your video screen, you'll see a panel of Slido events, as it were. There are two. One is a Q&A, so please put your questions there throughout the webinar and we'll take them as we go along rather than leaving them to the end. And also we'll be running 3 poll questions today, and you'll be able to see those in the other section of the Slido panel. So if you'd like to vote there, it would be great if you did, and we can see your thoughts on some of the questions that we're going to be addressing. So enough of me, and let me ask our speakers to introduce themselves. Ian, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your interest here.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon and evening as well to those of you in Europe and Asia. So NLP is actually my favorite area, sub-area of AI and linguistics. And that led me to my current role at Cube. I'm head of product for Reg AI, as Sarah mentioned. And Cube is a reg tech that delivers automated regulatory intelligence for global financial services organizations. So in that role, I work quite closely with our data science and ML teams. I oversee our overarching AI roadmap, which encompasses pretty much every flavor of NLP that you could imagine, from machine translation to text classification to recommendations and beyond. And prior to Cube, I worked in AI-oriented product roles across fintech and edtech, and I ultimately have a research background, a DPhil from the Oxford Internet Institute, and I analyzed the rhetoric and resonance of about 26 million Brexit tweets at that institute via ML and NLP techniques. One final point, my surname, Liu, happens to mean regulation in Mandarin. I think I was a bit destined to end up in reg tech. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And Celia, coming to you.
So thank you for having me here. Hello to everyone. I'm Celia Sapala. I'm actually currently a lecturer in the Department of Business Information Systems at University College Cork. And I have been here for over 4 years, conducting research on the application of NLP to RegTech systems and to more specifically to the analysis of regulatory definitions. So yeah, so that, and I have a background more in like NLP terminology and applied ontology. So,
excellent. Thank you. Over to you, Melanie.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm working as a regulatory change manager at Revolut currently. I started my career as a lawyer in New York and then made my way over to Europe, where I've worked in Switzerland and Luxembourg and now in the UK, focusing on regulatory change topics. And I was brought into Revolut to focus on the regulatory change process. So that involves setting up the horizon scanning and regulatory mapping processes, which is driven by NLP. And so that's where I'll be providing some insight today. And all of the opinions that I express will be my own and are not representative of Revolut's.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And let's get going. But let's get started with an audience poll. So audience, you can see the poll in your Slido panel there. The question is, what types of emerging technologies is your organization using in regulatory compliance? You can tick as many boxes as are appropriate to your organization. And while you do that, let me come to Yin to set the scene and talk a little bit about the types of emerging technologies being used in regulatory compliance.
It's an excellent question, Sarah. And I like to think about emerging tech in the framing of types of data, as well as the use cases and context, right? So I'll kind of go through some basic categories along those 2 dimensions. The first one is, of course, vast volumes of numerical data. Machines especially love this kind, doesn't have to be transformed too much. And this I can see in a wide volume of different use cases like behavior, transaction monitoring, regulatory risk analysis, for example, calculations. And so the emerging tech there would be general purpose machine learning, deep learning models, as well as computational algorithms like Monte Carlo simulations used for stress testing, for example, of portfolios. And that's a contrast, of course, to the ML approach, domain versus ML. Then we have image and video data, which is very relevant for electronic KYC and various kinds of document processing, as we still have large volumes of image-based regulatory text. And so computer vision would be the technology there. Then, of course, at the heart of today's discussion, speech and text data, potentially the most, I guess, prevalent data type as it pertains to compliance in particular. So for regulatory change, inventory management, what Melanie was mentioning about horizon scanning and mapping, all of that is premised upon vast swaths of text data. Also communication surveillance, fraud detection, other contexts in which NLP is relevant. Then we have, I guess, what I would characterize as repetitive basic tasks for reporting purposes, for tax and general regulatory reporting, and of course, reg change management. And that's where RPA, robotic process automation, comes into play as a technology. And a couple more, if I might add. One is another one around data that's relationship based, so relationships between different entities. And again, that plays a huge role in fraud detection, counterterrorism, anti-money laundering. And that's where network analysis, social network analysis as a technology, and machine learning and NLP play a role. And then finally, I would say if you've got multiple data types and formats, which most organizations do, the underlying technology of semantic AI, as represented, of course, in enterprise knowledge graphs, is becoming more and more common, although extremely difficult to orchestrate, because it involves not just machine learning expertise, but domain expertise as well. And that enables businesses to link data from various sources, various formats, provides very rich context. And again, we see this at play in fraud detection, AML, reg change management, predictive analytics, recommendation systems, and beyond.
Okay, that's great.
Laundry list.
That's great. Let's see what our audience says. Maybe see the poll result, and Yin, please feel free to comment on this. Is that what you would expect in terms of a sort of distribution of what people are using?
Yes. I was expecting NLP and machine learning to be in the top two. I am surprised by none of these, especially post-COVID, as we've seen a huge increase overall in RegTech adoption and general machine learning NLP adoption because of the pandemic. I will also note that there is some semantic overlap in these poll result terms, because AI encompasses both ML and NLP. So that aside, the results are generally in alignment, although none of these is surprising to me.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And the selection of voting options you can put down to me. But let me come back to you, Yin, and then I'll bring Melanie in after that. Yin, tell me more specifically, what is the potential of NLP in supporting compliance, and to what extent are FIs using it for this purpose? Obviously, we saw an indication there, but what are you seeing?
I would say the potential cannot be understated, is absolutely massive. Compliance today, and I hope Melanie might support me in this statement, I don't think it's possible without NLP in at least basic formats, right? And that can be rule-based, by the way. And in fact, a lot of NLP today is still rule-based, especially as it involves grammatical and syntactic analysis. But this is because compliance data, as I mentioned earlier, is largely about text. And there's three key dimensions of this text that make NLP indispensable for compliance today. Number one, it's extremely long, right? I mean, look at MiFID II as a prime example. It's over 30,000 pages. We've got 1.5 million paragraphs. Pretty much impossible to read that without the help of a machine. And tied to that, the complexity of the text is extremely high. It isn't just the jargon, it's also the multiple layers of self and cross references. I think the Bank of England actually proved this empirically when they did a comparison of pre-financial crash versus post-financial crash regulations of content. And it took longer to process linguistic units, partly because of the long chains of the references in the post-crash regulation. And then, of course, it's always evolving. I think about 300 million pages of regulation were published last year alone. So those three dimensions alone, I would say, make NLP indispensable. The other key thing to note is that there's a complete lack, even today, of standardization. And that's at two different levels, right? So one is that of language. And I think this is tied to a fundamental human habit that we all talk about the same concepts in different ways. And there is a rather everyday example that I've used recently, which is that of the tiny orange, right? It's a clementine, it's a mandarin, it's a tangerine, an easy peeler, a satsuma. We can't even agree upon this everyday object, how to refer to it. And so for regulations, the same exact problem, the tiny orange problem, but the stakes are much higher. Penalties, of course, could be in the millions and billions. And so that's one level. And then finally, the format is also largely unstandardized today. We're still looking at unmachine readable regulation. Hence, NLP and computer vision in conjunction need to be used to take out that text and make it machine readable. And so to answer your question more directly, Sarah, I believe that NLP can accelerate every single step of the end-to-end compliance journey. And there's three stages here. And I'll let Melanie fill in the details. The first stage, of course, is just staying up to date with reg change, having a comprehensive single source of truth of all the regulations and associated notices, enforcements, warnings, that kind of document, all in one place. And that's largely information retrieval, document processing, machine translation is huge there, and understanding the structure and being able to capture that in metadata. And extracting, of course, the key entities and classifying the text. That all falls under the first stage. Then you have to understand the content, which is far easier said than done, given what I mentioned earlier about the complexity, increased complexity. And that's obligation extraction, summaries, pulling out the key terms, even trying to risk assess the rules based upon the business profile and product lines and jurisdictions, and question answering as well, being able to understand the content by asking, for example, a chatbot powered by NLP, a question about the regulation, getting an answer and response. And then once that's done, the mapping exercise can properly begin. And that, of course, also requires understanding the semantics of the regulation and their sections and the semantics of internal documents and being able to link the two, right? And it's all the more complex, of course, for firms with multiple product and service lines across multiple jurisdictions, like Revolut.
Okay, we'll come on later to talk about how to do it, but coming over to you, Melanie, as a practitioner, where do you see the potential and how are you using NLP and what benefits can you gain?
Yeah, so the regulatory landscape is obviously becoming more and more demanding. And as Yin said, financial institutions are looking to NLP to automate some of the compliance processes and drive efficiencies. So instead of compliance officers spending all this time manually horizon scanning, reading through loads of content to find relevant pieces, finding the intricate changes to existing regulations, they can rely on this technology to detect all of the relevant content themselves, itself, and also segregate it by type. So maybe they could more quickly look at what is imposing an obligation or what is just guidance or what is just general market information. So that's freeing up time for other tasks, and it's also reducing human error of missing something. It also breaks down a lot of international barriers, so it can take into account local regulatory atmosphere and language, as Ian was saying, different terminology, and it's offering content that makes sense when translated. So this also allows for a more global approach to compliance. And all of this is helping demonstrate compliance to the regulators, which can open up more business opportunity and also prevent any potential fines.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Let's bring you in now, Celia. And can you talk a little bit, please, about which regulations and regulatory obligations are best suited to the application of NLP and what compliance benefits that can deliver?
Was that question for me?
No worries.
Yeah, so I would say it depends on at least like two aspects. So the type of regulation and the type of application case, which is related to the type of NLP tasks that are carried out. So regulations can be broadly described as either more rule-based or more principle-based. And rule-based regulations tend to be probably more specific and to include like particular and concrete information such as like transaction amounts, dates, durations, mentions of individuals and organizations. So in some, they have information that mostly follows clear patterns and on which current NLP models perform relatively well. So this type of rule-based regulations, I would say, are generally well-suited, for example, for information retrieval tasks. So for these reasons, I could say that perhaps rule-based regulations would be best suited to the application of NLP. On the other hand, principle-based regulations tend to be probably more general, more abstract, and ambiguous, often with exceptions. So they would be generally less suited for this type of application of NLP, like information retrieval, for example. But of course, this depends on the type of application case. So for example, NLP methods might be very well suited for both types of regulations when, for example, detecting regulatory change. As for the main benefits of NLP for compliance, so there, I think a lot of it has already been mentioned. So basically, it reduces manual effort on repetitive tasks. It reduces human error. It frees up time for more critical tasks that require human expertise. And at the end of the day, it probably also reduces the cost of compliance.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. And so back to you, Melanie, if I may. I have a quick comment to add there, I think. Yin, you'd like to add on those regs? Sure.
Very quick.
Sure.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback upon what Salja just said, and what Melanie said earlier around the kind of the benefits of NLP for compliance at large. I think a larger scale benefit, which isn't happening necessarily right this moment, but could happen in the near future, is helping regulated firms begin to surface, I guess, the discrepancies, the very ambiguities in that language written by the regulators, the issuing bodies, right? Surface it, make it tangible and concrete, and almost report upon that back to the regulators themselves. And in that way, to some degree, influence the way regulations are made. It's a win-win situation, of course. I think that's where the kind of the reg change software would play a key role. And for example, classic example, I think we might all know that there is a bit of a conflict between Basel III rules for lenders and Solvency II regulation for insurance. They're both very long, complex documents defining the same concepts in different ways, right? And so again, surfacing that ultimately helps regulated firms work more closely with the regulators themselves.
Okay, that's great. Thank you both for answering that one. So back to you, Melanie. And can you tell me, please, what sort of approaches can firms take to the implementation of NLP? Perhaps, and you're the expert, how and where it fits into compliance systems, exactly sort of how it should work, and what types of RegTech solutions are out there in the market that can help people?
Yeah, so it can fit into compliance systems in a lot of different ways. The content could feed into an organization's existing internal systems, or a RegTech provider could offer new tools to be capturing content. So the first part is really setting expectations about how the technology can support your compliance program, and then finding the right provider. Implementation requires a significant amount of effort because there are a lot of moving parts to manage internally, besides just testing the content from the provider. So my advice is to take a phased approach to implementation, and be realistic. It's not a quick fix solution. It may take some time to reap the benefits. You might be thinking, well, I can do it better when I manual horizon scan or something at the beginning, but I think it also relies on how much you invest into the testing and the implementation. As NLP does rely on machine learning, the more feedback and input that you put into it, the better the results that you're going to get. And then the machine can understand your requirements. And then you can reach that point where you see the benefit and you're receiving the results that you expected. But that certainly takes some time to get to that place. And I will pass it over to Yin to speak a bit more about the RegTech solutions available in the market.
Okay, and implementation, Yin.
Yeah, I actually had a very similar set of points to Melanie, which is great. So it shows we're quite aligned here. I think there's two main comments I had on the implementation side of things. The first, as Melanie put it, was about setting expectations. I couldn't agree more. The very first thing that has to happen is just the communication of the needs, the business context, what products and services are offered, which jurisdictions, even who the users should be, what their particular pain points are, which could be different within a single organization, of course, which leads to user permissions. Cube, as an example, RegTech product is incredibly modular. So we can customize the look and feel and experience for particular users, which we do during the onboarding process. But to do that, we need to understand the user needs and expectations, right? And we can even create, custom entities to project particular views of regulation content based upon those expectations. And we have developed this in-house ontology that is basically the vehicle through which we determine and capture those kind of bespoke requirements, which is mapped onto the client internal taxonomies as well. So that's the first part, communication of needs, expectation setting. Second part, also to echo what Melanie just said, the technical integration, you can't underscore the critical importance of that. So while, of course, some clients might choose to use the vendor in and of itself, I would say it is still very common to want to integrate the vendor's data within the overarching compliance ecosystem. And that data flow needs to happen in both directions, and it has to be seamless and as real time as possible. So in Cube's case, the reg data and metadata going into clients' internal systems or other GRC systems, and going back to Cube as well to allow for further machine learning and customization of Cube content to the customer content. It has to go both ways, and it's far easier said than done because there needs to be API capabilities developed on the customer side, ETL pipelines, technical standardization and documentation, and very critically, high quality comprehensive data that represents the internal universe, for example, internal obligation inventories. That needs to be in the right format to feed into Cube, right? So we spend a lot of time just sitting with clients in the implementation stage to work out these little details. And it can take a long time, but it is worth it, as Melanie said. Second part of the question was, could you remind me, types of RegTech solutions?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, I think we've exhausted the regulatory change management, automated regulatory intelligence subcategory in the answers to the previous questions and this one. I'll mention a couple more that I'm aware of that are quite salient. One is communication surveillance and trade surveillance, which is actually linked to MiFID II in that now communications that are mostly on messaging apps need to be monitored as well. And of course, COVID led to a massive increase. I think 90% of employees who admitted to sharing business sensitive data via WhatsApp and other applications. And of course, most work from home as well in recent months and years. So how can we make sure that that communication is monitored, especially if trading is involved, of course, and the regulator says, I want to know about this particular trade. Here's the ID, you have this much time to give me information. Most businesses probably couldn't do that without NLP to help surface that. Another massive area is just fraud detection and prevention. And I think my favorite use case in there is speech recognition, which is, I guess, a part of biometrics. And you can use that aspect of NLP to verify legitimate customers over the phone. And so it's quite a good defense against fraud. So
okay, lots going for it, but as you say, not always easy to implement and takes time and thought.
Absolutely not.
And as you both mentioned, you've got to get back to the beginning first, which is often something we get asked, where do you start? In fact, we may get asked that today, who knows? Anyway, let's move on again and let's run another audience poll if we may. The question this time, what are the challenges of implementing and using NLP in compliance at your organization? You've just mentioned quite a few of the large scale ones. Let's see what our audience is thinking. So once again, you can tick as many boxes as are appropriate to your organization. And while you do that, let me come to Celia to talk about the challenges and using NLP in compliance and the imperatives of model validation.
Yes, so of course there are many challenges. So the use of NLP in compliance presents with, so as we've seen, there's an awful lot of applications and methods involved, even in like subtasks of NLP, and they all have their distinct challenges. I thought I would maybe focus on three major ones here. Well, I guess I could mention the fourth one, which has already been touched upon by Ian. The semantic processing would be probably the most difficult task because it requires not only NLP, but external resources, knowledge bases, and even in non-specialized areas, the technology is still being worked upon. It's not really there yet. So that would probably be the toughest challenge, semantic analysis of regulations. And then you could, for example, to translate them into machine processable formalized versions, which you can use then for reasoning. But to address issues that are related to more general NLP tasks, I would choose three main challenges. So the one that has also been mentioned relates to the complexity of regulatory texts. So at the linguistic level, they tend to use very long sentences and with relative clauses and lists. And so this results in very complex syntactic structures that are difficult for NLP systems to parse. And the challenge here is that it may result in low performances in some tasks, which in turn may impact users' confidence in the adoption of NLP system in compliance. So that's one of the challenges. A second challenge is related to data silos, and that was also already mentioned. And these can, so the silos would be either internal to an organization's data or across legislations or jurisdictions. As you know, many elements such as like style, reference formats, terminology, abbreviations, etc., tend to be very specific to each context. So an NLP model developed, for example, for one legislation might not be readily usable for documents in another legislation, at least without the use of external standardized knowledge bases or ontologies to harmonize the data. So in this case, such resources are needed in combination with NLP models to overcome data silos and harmonize the information. And the third challenge is posed by the need to have reliably annotated domain-specific datasets that can be used for both developing accurate and reliable NLP models, but also for evaluating and validating them. It's very important to have a kind of benchmarks to ensure that to measure the performance of your system and to ensure that it is reliable. So to ensure that the annotations are reliable, it's also important to involve subject matter experts in the process, which is also a challenge because subject matter experts need to be trained for the different tasks they're involved in, and also they need to allocate a sufficient time for these tasks. So this would be kind of what I would see major challenges for compliance using NLP.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And Ian, what would you like to add there?
Yeah, so much of that resonated with me, Celia. I think I wanted to add one example for your last point about the challenge of reliably annotated domain-specific data sets. That to me is one of the critical challenges of legal/compliance NLP today. There's been so many breakthroughs, right, in recent years in terms of models and the emergence of these large language models trained on effectively the entire internet. But they're not domain specific for regulation, which is highly, highly complex, as we keep mentioning. And just to give one concrete example, there aren't really that many benchmarking data sets out there for legal regulatory data. There is a recent one I've come across, and it's called the Contract Understanding Atticus dataset, or CUDA. It was released, I think, late last year. I don't know if you're familiar with this one, but it just focused on one particular sub-area of legal documents, such as legal contracts. And over 1 year, 13,000 annotations were produced of important clauses. Dozens of legal students and professionals were involved in the process. There was an estimated value, which is an underestimate value of this data set of about 2 million USD. So just to represent, the length of time it took and the expertise of these professionals. And what makes it even more difficult is that annotation schema take annotation standards, right? That's another theme of this conversation, I think. That needs to be developed to enable intercoder reliability. And even, one single legal expert can look at the same contract at T equals 0, T equals 1 week, T equals 6 months, and have a different annotation because we're very inconsistent. So creating that schema takes time. Testing the schema takes time. I think for this particular data set, they had like 100 hours of training time for each annotator. Wow. Just to underscore how difficult it is to create. And that's just one particular well-curated data set of a subset of legal documents, never mind the entire regulatory internet. So okay. Yeah, and that's why at CUBE we also do have, I work quite closely with our internal research teams. We're quite privileged that we have those who've come from regulatory backgrounds, have worked for various issuing bodies. They've come to CUBE, and without them, I think the models would really suffer. And we have linguists as well, of course, on the team. But yeah, that balance and collaboration is absolutely key.
Okay, let's see what our audience say at a much higher level in terms of rather more like business terms. Yep. Celia, would you like to comment on those results?
So it is interesting. The necessary skills is, yes, I wasn't expected to be that high, but it actually makes sense because using NLP methods requires very specific training. So you need to have a background in kind of linguistic issues that you're tackling with the systems. You need to have the technical skills to be able to develop the models, whether they're rule-based or machine learning-based, and these involve very different types of skills. Of course, then, yeah, data silos are also an issue here, which is quite high. So, but yeah, I am not too surprised about the results.
Okay, no, that's great. There seems to be a shortfall in necessary skills across our industry at the moment. So, and firms looking at reskilling, but that's one for another day. So thank you for that, both of you. And I think let's take a quick break for some audience questions. I have a few here, and let me see where we're at. Okay. Well, here's the one that I thought might come up. Melanie, this is a very practitioner question. So it says, from a practical perspective, where is the best place to start with NLP?
So I think the best place to start is essentially trying to make a whole plan laid out on what you're expecting to achieve. So as far as what kind of content do you need? What systems will it plug into? Then all the technical aspects and who's going to be involved, capacity as far as staff, and generally, like as soon as you've documented everything, you have like essentially an RFP to speak to various providers to see what they can offer and if they will be able to satisfy all your requirements. And then also kind of like a cost benefit analysis budget, seeing what the costs are going to be involved and seeing if it's going to be worthwhile or something that you can actually move forward with. Also kind of defining timelines for what you want to achieve at what point and how the provider is going to be able to support you.
Okay, fine. So as you said, a very phased approach and a very gradual and careful approach. Yeah. Okay, and I have one for you here. It says, what is the panel's view on NLP and transparency? We could probably talk about this one forever.
Yes, I can't believe it hasn't come up yet. That's probably largely my fault as well. It's absolutely huge. Actually, one of our core pillars of AI at Cube is to be as explainable as we can. And so one example of this is that we have we have in the product an ability for users to indicate via simple thumbs up, thumbs down mechanism for the time being, whether a piece of content is relevant to them or not. And so there are models behind the scenes, but we actually, if customers ask for it, we actually share with them via data exports the full list of content that was definitely included or definitely excluded as a result of the models behind the scenes. Just so that, and on occasion, we do have a couple of users go, actually, I would have wanted to see that particular one that was excluded after all, which that feedback goes back to the model as well. But that's the level of transparency that we are aiming to achieve. And in fact, some of the items on our roadmap in the near future are to increase the transparency even further, give customers even more of an ability inside the actual product to indicate specific keywords and topics that they are or aren't interested in. This is absolutely key because otherwise there's no trust. And I think that this is a particular area of NLP where, I mean, obviously legal and risk and compliance professionals, by their very nature, you have to be risk averse, right? And the stakes are so high here that it would be absolutely insane to force a model upon a user via a product and just say, oh, look, it performs really well. Here are some numerical metrics that prove that. Oh ho, that's it. So it is, and I think the transparency goes both ways, that before any new NLP feature is released, the ideal should be that a wide variety of internal stakeholders, business professionals, as well as, of course, the SMEs we mentioned earlier, should be given as much of an understanding of how the model works before it's approved, right? And then externally, it goes both ways, but it's absolutely core to our philosophy. And I'm really happy that someone asked the question. Okay, excellent.
Celia, may I come to you? It says that these types of technology are difficult to introduce at our firm. How can we win hearts and minds?
Well, as Ian just mentioned, it would be good to involve actually everyone from all levels. So not only the technical staff who's working on the development part of the systems, but then managerial teams and experts, SMEs, kind of train them to raise awareness of the limitations of NLP and also the advantages, and then so basically kind of training people across the board to
take part. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Where are the quick wins? Yeah. Where are the quick wins? Melanie, please.
Yeah, I think we've definitely faced that challenge as well of like winning people over when, you know, they might have found some tool or they are very comfortable in their existing way of working and doing things, and why should they switch over, and why should they invest all this time into setting up this new process and working with this content when they think maybe they've got to a point where they can already do things more quickly. And I think it comes down to like top-down communication, understanding what the global benefits are. For us, it's like, yes, you can be across the world capturing your information on horizon scanning content, putting it into a spreadsheet, and you're content that you've captured everything, you're satisfying your regulators. But do we not want to work together as a global compliance team that's sharing information, that's understanding the risks worldwide, that's aligning our global policies and procedures? And how can we have then this visibility without using the NLP content, which we are feeding into our systems, using translation tools that they offer, so that we can have that accessibility across the business to all this information and help the business grow holistically. So I think it's really just about good communication, sharing objectives, understanding what the long-term benefits are going to be, and just accepting that there may be those challenges that we have to face together to get to where we want to be, but it will be worth it in the long run.
Okay, following on from that one, let me come back to you with one, Yin. And this may not be a possible question, or have a possible answer, I should say. And it says,
Oh dear.
Please would the panel share a rough cost analysis of implementing NLP? So I guess we're talking here about the inputs and the outputs, simply, perhaps not on cost, but yeah. Is there kind of a, I would add to that, perhaps, is there kind of a cutoff where it's probably not worth doing, or is it always worth doing?
It's a very good question. I can't give a specific. It's so hard because companies have such a wide range of use cases. In some companies, it's just a couple of users, in others, it's hundreds, if not 1,000. So it's really hard to even give a range. And Cube in particular, we do have two different flavors of the core product. One is for enterprise, one is for small and medium businesses. So just to kind of emphasize that there is such a wide range that there's no point in trying to pinpoint any numbers here. But I would say, I think that the way to quantify it is just to measure out like how much time per day on an individual person level is being spent on these mechanical, repetitive tasks that relate to NLP, like information retrieval being the classic one, and cutting and pasting into spreadsheets, having to update those spreadsheets whenever there's a change, just trying to quantify that time, multiply it by the number of personnel, look at their compensation package, perhaps, that kind of, you can get a ballpark estimate of what the current cost is. And then, of course, measure it again after, a trial with a RegTech vendor or an in-house built solution. You might choose to build your own. I mean, that it depends on the build or buy dilemma. I'm not going to get into that in detail, but that certainly is pertinent to this conversation as well. But that's my kind of rough initial, impressive answer to that question.
Okay, that's great. Good to hear that it's not sort of one size fits all as well. That you
absolutely not.
Yeah, you can decide depending on how big what your aims are. Okay, excellent. Let's go back to my questions. We do have a few more audience questions, but we will run out of time. So please, if one of your questions wasn't asked, I will be passing them on to Yin, who I hope will get back to you with some answers. So let's get back, and actually let's just run a final audience poll. I think we just about have time. The question this time: what are the business and operational benefits of NLP at your organization, or what would you expect them to be if you haven't implemented it yet? So while you answered those ones, let me come back to Yin for your views on the business and operational benefits. Obviously, we've skirted past a lot of these, but can you gather them together?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've talked about saving cost, saving time, saving, I would say, mental and emotional pain and labor, as it were. There's also the more positive framing of it, which basically we haven't quite addressed that area, which I think is the compelling rhetorical messaging that would win hearts and minds to answer that audience question, that if NLP were to be implemented and data flows were to be absolutely perfectly optimized in real time, two-way synchronization, just think about how the role of compliance could change. Fundamentally, this is like a seismic shift. I'm not using an exaggeration here. I hope Melanie and Celia don't disagree here, that if there were time opened up and the models deployed were trustworthy, right, and we're able to automate those low level repetitive tasks, then I think that the role of compliance could fundamentally shift to focus on maybe two key areas. One is looking at trends in the market, trying to predict what might happen in the future, and really being very proactive as opposed to reactive. The other one, of course, might be further involvement in core strategy decisions around, do we launch a new product or a new service in a certain jurisdiction, given the regulatory environment and the risk that poses to our business. And those two key areas might become a lot more pronounced, perhaps. It's hard to say. There's no one-size-fits-all compliance manager role. Of course, interpretation of regulation will never be fully automated. So that will still remain a core pillar. I forgot to mention that. But that, to me, is the kind of the benefits summarized, as it were, but more positively framed as opposed to just cost and time savings, right? Does that help? I mean, there's also, other areas beyond compliance where NLP could improve any business. I'm not sure if that's relevant to this question as well.
Okay, yeah, please do mention that, yeah.
Okay, well, I think the broad area of NLP that interests me in particular, that I think is delivering, so we talked about the processing of documents and information retrieval, and that's the operational benefits there are pretty obvious. I think we're now moving into a phase ever since 2018 or so, where natural language understanding, that sub area of NLP, has become really quite prominent. And so one of the biggest applications here is customer service, which would, of course, save a significant amount of time and money across companies if done right. This is, to me, the top use case, as I see it today, of NLP and NLU in particular. And this is increasingly via chatbots. We actually have one at Cube called Qbot. He's our mascot. And these chatbots are embedded in situ in the products, as well as websites. And so the whole idea is that they could take over a large part of the actual communication with customers, and therefore hopefully improve satisfaction and engagement. And of course, any kind of higher order questions would then be routed to the appropriate person. But you could just, again, the cost and time savings, and you can also make it interesting and fun as well for the user. But just to note that there has been a very recent breakthrough in the news this week. Not sure if anybody has seen this, but Google released this massive breakthrough in conversational AI about a year ago, called LaMDA. And it's caused a bit of controversy this week because one of Google's engineers has been suspended because he claimed that this model was, quote, sentient. And he published a conversation he had with this model that he was working with internally at Google, and said it demonstrates the equivalent intelligence of a 7 or 8-year-old child, which raises major philosophical questions. That example just goes to show to what degree NLU has really transformed chatbots in particular, which of course has implications for any company that has customer service as a function, right? There's also other areas like email, of course, classification, email management, being able to priority inbox, that kind of thing, which has happened for a long time, but again, boosted by NLU. Recruitment, a bit of a tricky one for bias and ethics issues, but again, that's another common area where you can see lots of improvement operationally. A couple that also interest me, I'll end on, semantic search engines. I mean, we encounter them every day in our personal lives, but to introduce them fully into business context, either to help customers or internal teams easily find relevant content, I think is a massive application. And then language generation, I'll end on that one. This is exciting. Again, NLU. Marketing teams being able to use these NLP-oriented models to write marketing and advertisement copy, and then A/B test that. And even engineers are being, you can give natural language input to some of these NLU models, and you get code. as a result. So engineers don't even have to write code anymore in some cases, right? So it's quite fascinating, I think, just the sheer breadth and depth of the applications of NLU in particular.
Right, absolutely. We'll probably come back to those another day in our sector, obviously, because a lot of this do apply. Let's have a look at those poll results. And Melanie, perhaps as a practitioner, you might like to comment on the kinds of benefits you would expect to gain.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree that there are business benefits because I think that as we maintain compliance, we're opening up potentially opportunities for further licensing, keeping up to date with all the regulatory requirements, expanding to newer markets. This technology is allowing us to be able to expand in all those areas at greater ease. So I think generally the results look pretty on point to me.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's come to our final question for today. And it's me asking all our speakers what advice they would give to practitioners using or planning to use NLP in regulatory compliance. Celia, would you like to start, please, with some advice?
Yes, so I suppose I'm going to be repeating a bit of what I already said and what was said before by my co-presenters. So first, ensure that NLP processes are designed by experts who are specifically trained in NLP with adequate knowledge of the linguistic issues and the NLP methods. Then second would be that to keep the human experts or humans in the loop at all stages of development, if possible. So data compilation, annotation, verification of NLP outputs, etc. And then train all users at all levels, be it developers, subject matter experts, management, to be it at least to raise awareness of the advantages and limitations of NLP systems. Those would be my...
Thank you. That's great. Melanie, what advice would you give our listeners?
I would say the one biggest piece of advice would be having open communication with your RegTech provider. So if you're sharing the challenges you're facing, if you're giving them some insight on the internal systems you have and how the content is feeding that, also giving them feedback on how their systems could be improved, then I think you'll more quickly achieve your intended results. The provider should have an interest in not only making their customers happy, but also improving their products and services. They may be able to provide suggestions, and they also might be able to have quick solutions that you wouldn't even expect.
Okay, that's great. And Ian, some final words from you here.
That's a very nice coincidence, actually, Melanie, because one of my points was the inverse of yours, which is work in close collaboration with the users and make sure that there is that open communication coming from the vendor perspective. I think that's absolutely key. And that ties into the integration point, which is the more technical side of it that we mentioned earlier, integration in both directions of data being pivotal. Another couple of points, as you asked for 3, Sarah. I guess the second one is just around the fact that, yes, there have been significant improvements in models, deep learning models for NLP in recent years, and they're very impressive, but that they've kind of led to an over emphasis on the models, at least in the NLP development space and the media. And I think there needs to be a shift back to data-centric AI, as we've all been discussing in this webinar. And so, and that's especially important for our domain-specific data here, nuanced, complex regulatory text. And so the advice here is to just spend time standardizing and annotating your relevant data assets. The more labeled data we have, the better. And just invest time and energy in annotation schema. It's going to pay off in the long run. And it's really needed in this domain. And the third point is just to reemphasize the mindset shift and the fact that AI and NLP in particular are not replacing you, the legal, compliance, risk, financial professional, of course. It's assisting you to make data-driven decisions. You're still in control. There needs to be that transparency. If there isn't, do not sign any contracts with any vendors. Human intervention in RegTech NLP is indispensable, right? Given that domain expertise, the judgment cannot ever be replaced. It's that the NLP models give you input for your decision-making processes. That's the way to frame it, and that's how it should be. And again, on a high level, this would redefine, hopefully, the scope of the role of the 21st century compliance officer to allow focus on things like reg change and business strategy.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you to all our speakers for sharing their expertise and experience today. A really interesting conversation. So indeed, thank you to all of you. Thank you to Cube for sponsoring today's webinar. Before we close, just a few A-Team group items that may be of interest to you. If you scroll down your screen to additional options, you can take a look at A-Team Connect, our professional platform that you can use to deliver highly effective and interactive events and webinars. You can also register to attend our 4th of October RegTech Summit in London. So you can click on there and sign up, or you can download the latest edition of our Regulatory Data Handbook. I think it's about the 9th edition now. Loads and loads of detail in there just to check up on the various requirements, etc., of different regulations. That said, that's it for today. So thank you again to Yin, Melanie and Celia. And thank you to all of you who've taken part in the webinar. Please complete our feedback form, as we are always keen to hear your views and improve our products. Meantime, thanks again and goodbye.